Check, check, mic check. Check, check, mic check. Welcome to Podcast Envy. I'm your podcast boss, Andrea Klunder, and I've got to say, I think this is a great time for podcasters. And I'm not saying that because it's a great time overall by any stretch of the imagination. And I'm not saying that to brag. And I'm not saying it because I'm totally tone deaf to all of the challenges and devastation and frustration and suffering that's happening in the world right now. I'm saying that it is precisely because of all of that that I am grateful for the community of podcasters who have stepped up to support their listeners, to be vulnerable, to build community and make connections, to be reflective and thoughtful and compassionate and provide a space for us, the audience, to listen and reflect and think and feel. Podcasting has been a lifeline for me over the past couple months, both as a creator and a listener. There have been days when I rely on the shows that are covering current events and culture from various perspectives, and days when I am so relieved to have shows that take my mind off of it all. So right now on Podcast Envy, I want to take some time to shine the spotlight on some podcasters who are doing exactly that, fully embodying their role as a vocal leader for their communities in bold and creative and sometimes tentative ways. We don't always know exactly what we're doing, but we're willing to show up, to try something, to be responsive and adaptive. Okay, enough waxing poetic about podcasters from me. Today's guest is someone whom I've just met and whose show I just discovered through the She Podcasts online community on Facebook. And I'm so glad we made the connection, and I am so happy to introduce to you Holly Chayes. Holly is the producer and host of Talking About Clothes. The concept of her show is exactly what it sounds like: people who wear clothes talking about them. At least on the surface. But dig a little deeper and you'll start to realize that what we wear, why we choose the clothes we choose, and how we feel about them and in them often has more to do with psychology, emotions, memory, and culture than to do with straight up fashion trends. As a personal stylist, Holly is not using her show to talk about dressing for your body shape or 25 ways to wear that patterned scarf you bought this season, though she could. She's more interested in stories, memories, and mindset. Think of it as life coaching from your closet. But seriously, based in New York, Holly had to make some quick pivots before releasing season 3 of her show right in the beginning of the shelter-in-place period. And in this episode, you'll hear more about her pandemic podcasting strategy, as well as some fantastic advice on how we can turn to our wardrobes right now for inspiration, comfort, and meaning. Links to Talking About Clothes with Holly Chayes and social media will be in the show notes for this episode, in the description, in your listening app, and at thecreativeimpaster.com/podenvy059. Holly Chayes, thank you so much for joining me on Podcast Envy. I almost forgot what show I'm making because I have more than one that I host. I was like, wait, where are we?
What are we talking about? What's going on? What day is it?
Podcasting.
Excellent. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited.
So tell us a little bit about your podcast, Talking About Clothes.
Yeah.
And the origin. Where did it come from?
Yeah. So it's called Talking About Clothes with Holly Chayes. And the tagline is where I talk about clothes with people who wear them. The whole point is to engage in conversations about clothing, understanding that by thinking about and talking about the items we have in our lives, we can better understand ourselves. So I'm a stylist and a wardrobe consultant. And so that's what I talk to people about. That's what I talk to my clients about. When I give workshops and speak and do all the things, that's what I talk about and do. So it seemed a very natural fit to talk about it on a podcast.
Yeah. And what I think is interesting about your show is that it is not a fashion podcast necessarily. So we're talking about style, personal style, clothing, but it's not necessarily, oh, here are the 5 different body shapes and
Right.
what you should wear for your shape. And here's how to
Yeah.
dress to impress.
Yeah. This could devolve very quickly into my ranting about all of those things, which is why we don't talk about them. But I believe very firmly that everyone has a sense of style. There is no such thing as people who have style and people who don't have style. When we know who we are, when we love ourselves, when we're fully embodied, that shows through in our clothing. So we can use our clothing to find those inner things as well. It's a two-way street and we can approach it from both directions.
Why were you attracted to podcasting in the first place?
So I've been listening to podcasts since like 2008, like a really long time. And so I've always enjoyed the medium and I enjoy the intimacy and the connection and you get really good conversations out of a podcast when it's good. So I always have known about the form and all of that. And I decided to start one because I actually injured my shoulder like a year or so ago. So that's meant that computer time has been very limited and I have to be very strategic about how much time I spend typing and writing and that sort of thing. So a podcast means that while I have to edit the audio, I don't have to type the content.
When you're seeking out guests, because it's not just you being the expert on all things, but when you're seeking out guests, how do you go about choosing your guests? Because again, you're not necessarily like bringing on different industry experts all the time.
So every season of the podcast is focused around a specific topic. So like we've done comfort, we've done personal style. I have a season lined up about shopping and about travel and all of those sorts of things. So I basically ask people what they want to talk about, and then I kind of slot them into a season. So when I have enough people who want to talk about comfort, I have a comfort season. When I have enough people who want to talk about personal style, I do a personal style season. I assume if you want to have a conversation with me, then you think you're interesting and can talk about clothes. It's sort of like, I assume that you want to be there because you're there. So I don't really think too hard about it.
How do you find people? Do you have a form on your website, or how do people reach out to you, or do you reach out to people, or both?
Both. I have a form on my website. So if you go to whowearswho.com/podcast and scroll all the way to the bottom, there's a Google form that you can fill out. It just asks a number of basic questions and like, what do you want to talk about?
I was thinking about how we have memories, talking about like who you are and your personal identity and how clothes can be an indication of that or a representation of that or reflection of that. I also like listening to a lot of food podcasts, and people have emotional memories tied to food. And I was thinking about how it is actually very similar to clothing. I just have never thought about it necessarily in that way. And also like people have trauma associated,
Yeah,
like traumatic
absolutely.
memories
Yeah.
with clothing.
Yeah, it's a huge thing that is very intuitive, but it's not obvious. It's something that when you point it out or you realize it or you start talking about it, that everyone's like, oh, right. Clothes are with us through everything, pretty much. So we have those memories associated with the clothes that we were wearing, just like the food and smells and physical locations and that sort of thing. And we don't get into the psychology, but it's not frivolous either. As fun as it is, it's not frivolous. It's not shallow. It's not what we assume conversations about clothing will be.
Yeah. So one of the things we wanted to talk about here on this series is the current times and the pandemic situation, the shelter in place things.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously a lot of thinking and feeling and conversations around clothes and what we're wearing are coming up. And I posted, it was early on in the shelter in place. I primarily work from home anyway. So that's not that different for me. But for some reason, the first couple of weeks of like having to be there, I was not changing out of my pajamas.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not normal behavior for me. And I don't know why I didn't. I just didn't. And there was one day that I was working on my laptop on my couch and I had this like full length mirror that was propped up against the wall. And I just happened to look up and I caught sight of myself wearing like ridiculous pajamas and working seriously with my headphones on, editing. And I was like, oh my God, what are you wearing? Like, what? You look ridiculous right now. And I took a picture of myself in the mirror
Yeah.
because I felt like it was just such an awkward moment. And it was like 5 o'clock in the evening.
Right. Right.
And I was like, why is this happening? And I posted on Instagram and I got like so many people. And I kind of put a question like, what are you wearing right now? So many people commented and liked it. And there was like an immediate reaction or immediate connection or identification with that post. And I was thinking like, no, like you need to get up and you need to put on clothes. But at the same time, I am like, where are my yoga pants? All I want are yoga pants. I don't want to wear anything. You know, I might wear a nice shirt if I have an interview or if I'm doing a Facebook Live or something like that. I might wear a nice shirt and put on makeup, but I'm definitely wearing yoga pants. You know?
Yeah.
So how do you think this shelter in place and like stay at home, how is that affecting or changing the ways that people think about what they're wearing? And is it important for us to think about our clothes in a different way at this time?
Yeah, I think there's a lot happening in general. Like, probably goes without saying, a lot is happening. So if you work in an office every workday, you're dealing with not having to get dressed in like business casual or business formal or whatever. If you work from home and always have or have for a long period of time, you're dealing with the realization that you're not going to have to go run errands. You're not going to be suddenly invited to like a coffee, whatever. And if you're homeschooling, you have to deal with the kids. And if you're not, you have to only deal with other adults or not. We only see each other from like the shoulders up now. Or the people you're quarantining with, they're also feeling like slobs, so they really don't care if you're only in pajamas. At the same time, we also are kind of wanting comfort and we're wanting familiarity and we're wanting to feel like there's something to rely on. And I think we can often turn to our closets when that's true.
Yeah, I noticed myself. So I enjoy shopping on the ThredUp app. And I noticed when I am feeling that feeling of like, I want to disassociate for a little bit, I'm scrolling through ThredUp. I do not need to buy new clothes at this time. Clearly, I'm not, you know, there's no speaking event coming up, but I'll find myself aspirationally marking things that I like, you know, the little heart symbol. And I'm filling my favorites with this would look good online for a Zoom call category. Like, oh, that has an interesting neckline, or oh, that would be a good color for me, or something like that. And then there's when we can go out and be social again, I would like to wear this outfit.
Right. So there's the aspirational online shopping, scrolling situation that's taking over what would happen when we used to like wander and window shop. Then there's the other, like if you're big into thrifting and you don't have experience using apps previously, kind of not being able to dig through a pile of clothes is suddenly taken away. I was talking with a friend and she was like, I don't shop a lot. I'm not a shopaholic. I don't shop every day or every week or every month, but the not being able to just run out and pick something up if I wanted to is making me realize how much I relied on the possibility of being able to do that.
So what are you recommending for people, like for your clients and people in your community? What are you recommending that they do at this time? Like, is this a good time to be cleaning out your closet? Or is this a good time to be sorting things for a donation pile? Or is this a good time to be revisiting clothes that you haven't worn for a while? Where would our focus be if we find ourselves thinking about our clothes a lot right now?
Yeah, the biggest thing I would say is to observe what you're thinking. Don't act rashly, please. Because the answer does depend a lot. It depends on the state of your closet. It depends on what you generally turn to when things are up in the air. It depends on what the economy is going to be when this is over. All of that really influences what you quote unquote should be doing. So it's really a case by case basis. But the first step is always to observe what you're thinking and to kindly question it. Like if you're wanting to clean out your closet, ask yourself, where is this impulse coming from? Is it coming from the need to control something? Is it coming from the need to let go of something? Is it coming from the realization that you never liked half the stuff in there anyway? So like, why are you holding on to it? And all of those can be true at the exact same time.
Yeah, I love that advice because it's coming more from like an internal, personal place. And I know, what is your tagline on your website?
Oh yeah, I fix what's broken,
Yes.
basically. If there's something broken in your closet, I fix it. And
Right.
if you feel uncomfortable or hesitant or awkward about clothing, something is broken in your closet.
Right. And you're approaching it less from both, right? From the pragmatic, what items do you need to have to fit your lifestyle and the activities that you're doing and things like that, and what does fit you well and what doesn't fit you well. And then also, how do you feel when you are looking at this thing or looking at your closet or thinking about getting dressed in the morning? And so the broken might not be the actual clothes in the wardrobe. It might be the way that you're thinking about them or the way that you're feeling about them.
Totally, totally. And one more point about kind of what we're all realizing in this stay-at-home, quarantine, self-isolate time is that there's no one to dress for. So like we're suddenly actually being able to dress for ourselves. And we usually don't do that, and it gets really uncomfortable really quickly.
That is such a good point.
Yeah.
There's no one to dress for.
Yeah.
That is both sad and liberating at the same time.
It's like the most hopeful nihilism there is. It's like none of it matters, so you can do anything.
It's Podcast Angel time. Podcast Angels are those products, services, and resources that I know will be hugely beneficial to you on your podcasting journey and who help support my own podcasting efforts financially so that I can keep bringing you this show. And although you may have no one to dress for right now, you have plenty of people to podcast for, and I want to help you craft a show you and your audience will love. Podcast Envy, Craft and Culture is my exclusive membership space for both current and aspiring podcasters to get you the support you need to create and grow your show in a way that is nurturing, genuine, and enjoyable. You can get started for just $5 a month with my online classes, Launch Your Podcast and Get Better Interviews. Plus, new classes are being added every month. You'll also get access to a private podcast feed where I answer your top questions. Seriously, ask me your question and I'll turn it into a personal podcast episode. And when you upgrade to VIP by June 1st, 2020 for just $19 per month, you'll also get a shout out on Podcast Envy, monthly group office hours with me, and access to my exclusive industry insider newsletter that usually only goes to my private podcast editing clients. So whether you're dreaming of having your own show or you already do and you're tired of trying to do it all alone, you don't have to. Let's do it together. Details are at thecreativeimposter.com/craft and culture, linked conveniently for you in the show notes for this episode. Now is the time for your voice to be heard. So we talked a little bit about the idea behind your show, and we talked about how you choose guests to have on your show and how you organize your seasons. Do you have a sense, and this is something that I think is so hard, so I don't know if you know this about me, but besides making this podcast, I'm also a podcasting consultant and coach and work with other podcasters. And I think that one thing that is really challenging sometimes for us is to know who our audience actually is. All that being said, do you have a sense of who your audience is or who they might be and what type of people are really listening to your show?
I try not to pay too much attention to all of those stats, like the statistics that you can gather, because I don't think that they are helpful for me because I work with a very, like, you know it when you see it type of person. They want to fix what's not working in their closet. They don't think clothes are frivolous, but they're not following, they don't subscribe to Vogue and InStyle and all of these magazines. They might subscribe to one or two. They might follow a handful of beauty channels on YouTube or like follow a couple blogs, but they're not immersed in that world. They know it matters, but they have better things to do. Like they aren't able to consume content constantly, but they know that clothes matter and they know that there's something deeper than how to dress an apple body shape or the best 50 dresses under $50 or whatever. They know or they sense that there's something there, but they can't quite put their finger on it, which is where I come in.
And so how do you think that your show, and actually the whole inspiration for this series and why I wanted to have these conversations is because I was seeing in a lot of the groups, the Facebook groups for podcasters, people kind of questioning because during the pandemic, download numbers in general for a lot of people's shows have dipped a little bit, like maybe not as many people are listening. Some people were like, well, maybe I shouldn't be releasing as much content right now. Maybe I should take a break. Maybe people don't have time to listen. Maybe my particular content isn't even relevant right now, or it's somehow not quite a right fit.
Or like in bad taste. Like no one wants to be the person who's like, I don't know, some tragedy happened and you're like still watching the football game or whatever. Like no one wants to be that person.
And there's still an argument to be said for like, I'm watching my own listening habits. And there are some days when I only want to listen to content that is specifically addressing COVID-19 and shelter in place from whatever their perspective is. And then there are some days when I'm like, please, can we talk about anything other than that? Like, can I just listen to a normal podcast about normal things and not have to like, so there's a balance, I think. But for you, how do you see your podcast as supporting and helping that audience and those listeners at this time as a resource, as an asset for them?
Yeah, that's part of what I love about clothes is it can be an escape because there's definitely an element of fantasy and aspiration to clothing and getting dressed and expressing ourselves and our style. And then there's also the practicality of how do you look good on a Zoom meeting call? And how do you show your personality and dress and be professional when you can only be seen from like the armpits or shoulders up? All sorts of normal go-to outfits just look really boring because there's nothing around our necks or heads. And then there's also the very practical, like, have you worn the same shirt on the same call with the same people for 3 weeks in a row because you now only see them once a week? And it's like, do they notice? Do they care? Who knows? Some of them do, some of them don't. Part of what I love about my podcast is that we talk about all of those angles of it. We talk about the frivolous, we talk about the fun, and we talk about the practical as well as the deep and the psychological.
And you also made a conscious decision to change directions.
Yes.
For the current season and go with a plan B.
Yeah. So I was scheduled to release the third season on like the very first week in April or so. And I live in New York City. So we got hit really early. And my sister and I actually decided to leave the city very early on in all of this. We were like, this is an island. This is not a good place to be trapped when this gets worse. So I was planning on releasing that season right around that time. And it was all about shopping, which seemed like a pretty tone deaf move. So I didn't release it. All of the conversations were had, all of the guests were teed up, almost all of the editing was done. So I'm just going to release it later at some point in the future. It just felt very out of sync with what was happening.
Yeah.
And we like talk about deep stuff. I think it could have been totally fine, but it just felt like a bad idea. So I didn't. I decided to record a totally new season, which is actually being released kind of piecemeal. I usually drop the seasons all at once,
Hmm.
all of the episodes. And it's revisiting a wardrobe project I did about 5 years ago called the Self-Made Wardrobe Project, where I only wore clothes that I had made for a whole year.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been really interesting to revisit some of those angles and threads and like, what do you do when nothing to wear is no longer like something you say as a joke when you have a closet full of stuff. So it's been really interesting to think about those things as they relate to COVID, but not in relation to COVID, if that makes sense.
Right. It feels, it's almost like
Mm-hmm.
energetically, the topic is more in line
Yeah.
with what people are thinking about.
Right. It's like I can talk about how long, because I ended up going in that year almost 200 days without a pair of jeans or pants. And
You're not a denim manufacturer.
who knew? Who knew? But I can talk about like, how long do you think you can go without something that you relied on every single day,
Yeah.
which is very topical right now. But we're talking about a pair of jeans that I made 5 years ago. So it's talking about what's happening without talking about what's happening.
I think that's very smart.
And
That's
it
very
just
smart.
felt better. The episodes are like 5 minutes long and more consumable. They're easier to create. They're kind of a little lower production value, but like still very listenable too.
Yeah. And I also think the duration, I do think that people's attention spans are different than what they
Mhm.
normally are.
Right.
And I think podcast listeners in general, as like a whole, we
Mhm.
tend to have a better ability to pay attention. We tend to enjoy longer
Right.
form content and be able to consume that. I typically gravitate towards the episodes that are somewhere between a half hour and 60 minutes.
Mhm.
And lately, I have a queue full of 60-minute podcast
Right.
episodes that I'm like,
It feels like such a commitment to listen to 60 minutes of something right now.
So, yeah, looking for like, okay, I just need to take a break from thinking or working or whatever for like 15 minutes, 5
Mhm.
minutes, 10 minutes.
Mhm.
What do I have in my queue that, oh, perfect,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
here it is. I just a short little something
Yep.
that's like a little tasty treat of a
Mhm.
podcast without being like, okay, I'm
Right.
going in.
Right. And that's not a news podcast.
Yeah. You mentioned this is kind of a tangent, but you mentioned that you normally drop your entire season at once rather than releasing, let's say, on a weekly basis or something like that. Where did that idea come from? This is just my own
Yeah.
curiosity.
Yeah. So it came from the fact that I don't keep up with podcasts. I let them accumulate and then I'll listen to like 5 episodes at once.
Interesting.
So the whole concept of the show is that I gather a handful of people. We all talk about the same topic, but because the conversations are all different, it covers a whole broad variety of angles and opinions and thoughts on that topic. So like the first season had 6 people talking about comfort and everyone brought up different things, but there were really interesting overlaps and echoes between conversations, even though the guests didn't hear the previous like other conversations. So I wanted to be able to give the season as a whole is one thing, and then each episode within the season is its own thing as well.
Yeah, I think that's interesting because one piece of advice, whether it be a client or whether it be somebody in a Facebook group or something,
Right.
is asking, should I do this or should I do that? Should I release my episodes like this or like that? Should I have this kind of intro or that kind of intro? Oftentimes, my first response is, well, what do you like? For you as a listener, when you listen to podcasts, what are you attracted to? What do you like? What do you not like? And start there.
I also think there's something in there about make the best decision for what you're creating. So, if this were a show interviewing experts, it would probably make more sense to drop an episode every week so that that conversation could have its own release and attention and all of that. But because these are conversations with just people who wear clothes, there's like more I want to say like seasonal structural integrity to
Mhm.
treating the season as a whole. I don't quite know what that means, but there's something really magical about realizing that the first conversation in this season, the fourth conversation, and like the very end of the sixth conversation all mention that like the fact that women's clothes don't have pockets is complete baloney without like any prompting. Like there's something in there, the cross conversational pickups that happen
Yeah.
is really rather magical, I think.
Yeah. What have been some of the benefits? So, how long ago did you start your show?
I started in early January. So I like it was
Of
actually
2020?
of 2020. Yeah,
Oh, it's so
it's
new.
very new. Yes, it's a baby podcast. Yeah.
What have been some of the benefits that you have personally gotten from making your show?
It lets me ask people all the questions that are like really rude to ask people in public. It's been a really amazing vehicle to like asking people about their clothes.
Are there any parts of making the show or podcasting in general that you find frustrating or that you don't love?
I always have to psych myself up to edit, but at the same time, I don't have to edit every week. So like I can
Yeah.
kind of batch all my editing together, which is really nice. And there's always like the first 10 minutes of listening to myself speak. I sort of hate everything about the sound of my voice. And then it's just another voice that I'm listening to.
Do you have an idea of the future of your show and where it might go? I mean, beyond the fact that you have this whole other season that
Mhm.
I'm assuming you're just holding and it will come when
It'll
the time
come.
is right.
Yep. Yep. That's what's going to happen. Yeah, I'm really interested to create that really strong season to season structure so that I can break it. I'm really looking forward to the day when like the seasons and all of the support systems around recording and editing and publishing and releasing and promoting and all of that are strong enough that I can do one-off episodes between seasons. When I can do like a historian expert interview between seasons, or I can do a psychologist's interview between seasons, or I can do like a roundtable episode or season, or a like reverse season where like all of my guests ask me the questions that they always wish that they could ask a stylist. That's what I'm really looking forward to.
One of the most amazing things about being a podcaster
Mhm.
is that you can really pretty much do whatever you
Yeah.
want. Like you can, it's your
Mhm.
show. You don't have to pitch it to an
Mhm.
exec or,
Mhm.
be beholden necessarily to advertisers. And so you do have the flexibility and the creativity. And I like hearing that you're not stuck in your box, that you have these other ideas of what else might be possible.
Yeah, because I have been listening to podcasts since like the early days of podcasts.
Pre-iPhone, or was the iPhone out by then? I can't remember.
2008, I think like the first iPhone was out.
Okay.
But I have thought about having a podcast in the past, but I didn't really want to be committing to an episode every single week. So thinking about what is a podcast and realizing that a podcast is an RSS feed of audio, like that's what it is,
Yeah.
meant that I felt I could be very capricious with the form of the show that I'm creating, which was very liberating.
And what advice do you have for a new or soon to be or aspiring podcaster?
Mm. Know why you want to create the show that you're trying to create.
Yes.
Yeah. And my second is an editing note because my background's in theater. And I remember a director once saying that watching someone think is really boring.
Mm,
So listening to someone think is also really boring. So
yes.
kind of shorten your thinking pauses.
Oh my God, that is music to my
Yeah.
ears.
Yeah.
As a podcast editor, I cringe so hard every time somebody says, I don't edit my shows. I just want them to sound natural. And I'm like, yes.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
what you just said.
Yeah. I don't like, I edit all of my shows, but mostly I'm just like compressing the conversation so
Right.
that when there's like 3 breaths between my stopping a sentence and starting the next one, it's like 1 breath. Like
Right.
so you get the rhythm of the conversation, you get the rhythm of, especially on the solo shows, of when I pause to think about what I'm saying next, but
Yeah.
you don't have to sit there for 3 seconds while I'm like scratching my chin or whatever.
Right. Pause while I scratch my
Yeah.
chin.
Pardon me.
Holly, is there anything else that you want to share about your show or about podcasting in general, or even about clothing and how we're feeling about what it is that we're wearing these days right now? Anything else that you would like for Podcast Envy listeners to consider or think about or know?
I think just like this is a really complicated time, and it's just complicated, and letting it be complicated makes it a lot simpler.
Podcast Envy is produced by your podcast boss, Andrea Klunder. That's me. The Podcast Envy theme music is by Valentin Sosnitsky, courtesy of the Free Sound Project at freesound.org, and our podcast Angel music is by Benjamin Mastropolito, also on freesound.org as Lemon Cream. All music is licensed under the Creative Commons. Our episodes are mixed by Edwin Ruiz, and hey, if you want your show to sound as good as ours, hire us. Put the magic audio mojo of the Creative Imposter Studios to work for you. Thanks so much for listening, and here's to making your podcast the envy of everyone else.